Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tanya Smigaki. I'm head of community and partnerships here at Vantage Ventures. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with us, Vantage Ventures is initiatives started by the John Chambers School of Business and Economics at West Virginia University to launch high-impact scalable businesses that are tackling highly complex challenges. We support entrepreneurs throughout the state of West Virginia. And we are hoping that these entrepreneurs are having scalable, capital efficient technologies and that they come back or start these technologies within West Virginia. We actively partner and support entrepreneurs throughout the state, as well as others, to build a thriving ecosystem here at WVU, as well as across the state. Joining us today, we're very honored to have you here for our Real Talk series. We have with us the CEO and founder of Harvestly, Walter Lafky. We look forward to this discussion as we learn from his experience on how Harvestly's vision has created works and initiatives in the ag tech field. It's providing access and healthy foods available to all. Centered around health, sustainability, and the local economy, we look forward to this discussion today so we can learn how Harvestly aims to change the current food system and its devastating impact on communities. Welcome, Walter. We're very excited to have you here.
Thank you. Super excited myself.
So to begin, I was wondering if you could give me a brief background about yourself and what led you to create Harvestly.
Totally. So as Tanya said, my name's Walter, and I'm actually a fourth year student here at Cal Poly. I'm in the agriculture business major here, so I'll actually be graduating this year. I started Harvestly about 2 years ago and launched our first product about a year and a half ago. I grew up in Bend, Oregon, grew up kind of in the agriculture space. My family had a property which we did some farming on. And then, I actually went to Sun Valley, Idaho to go to high school and attended a ski academy and ski raced my whole life and traveled around the world. And then I came here to Cal Poly to, graduate and get a degree in ag business.
Great. Well, if you could explain to us, which is something that I learned this year, what exactly is a food desert and how do you feel that Harvestly can help?
Yeah, I think food deserts, carry different definitions across the world. But for me, what a food desert is, and this is kind of what the direction of the USDA has been going in, which is low income and low access. So this is really addressing, the first one is people who can't afford the food that they need to survive. So this is, a basic human right is to get nutritious food and be able to survive and not have to spend all your money on food. And then the second piece there is the low access, which is the USDA has different definitions for this, but it's typically, they can't get to some kind of grocery store or some kind of aggregation of food within a mile of them. And there's different levels of low access that range from a mile to 5 miles to 10 miles. And throughout the US, there's a significant issue, particularly on the low access, because it is so hard to find an aggregation point where you can actually get the nutritious food that you need, let alone pay for it, right? So that is a problem we're trying to solve, even though, in a lot of these food deserts, there are producers producing food, but it's actually being kind of sent away or to other, more profitable locations.
Local food producers may be underserved by technology and neglected in many ways. How do you feel that Harvestly can create change and impact?
Yeah, so agriculture in general has been not touched by a lot of technology, particularly on the software side. There is more and more hardware on the, the tractor side and the robotic side, drones, all that good stuff. But in general, agriculture has historically not been touched by software. And it's kind of a market that a lot of, techie people don't look at because it's something that, the average consumer doesn't really think about how we're producing our food. It's like, they'll go to the grocery store and they'll see the food and they buy it. They're not thinking about where it came from or how it was produced. And so generally, people who are in software are not thinking about that farming piece. And that's on a big scale, right? So you're talking about the big farms and that kind of stuff, but then it gets even worse when you talk about the smaller producers, because those are even a less attractive market to, people who are investing in tech. But what I saw as an opportunity was, there is no software here. In a lot of cases, for our vendors, we are truly the first software platform that they're engaging with. Maybe they're using Venmo to take payments, but that's, essentially we're this first enabling software platform to help them grow their business.
I know you grew up on a farm, and at the age of 14, you had this idea that there's a better way for our food supply. You grew up with sort of a natural appreciation of organic, healthy food. How do you feel that Harvestly can better educate the public on perhaps taking healthier, locally sourced food choices?
Yeah, so I haven't totally explained what we do at Harvestly, but the main idea is that we're a marketplace connecting local food producers to local consumers. We provide a listing service, so they get to list their products on our website. And then we provide an aggregation service, so we aggregate those goods, and then we deliver those goods to the end consumer. So that's the main core business of ours. So where this really came from was growing up. I started a small business when I was about 14 years old, and I started with like a $50 loan from my dad, and we started working out on one of my family's properties in Northern Oregon. And I planted, I think that year I planted like 10 tomato plants. And on paper, it looks great. It's like, okay, I'm going to spend $50 on 50 plants, and then each plant is going to produce X amount of tomatoes, and then I'm going to sell those. So I'm going to make money, right? And so it looked really good on paper. And, I was supported by my parents at the time. So it wasn't like I had to make money on it, but it was really fun. I learned a lot that first year, and it was like, I really like this. This is a fun project. And so the next year I brought, the $500 that I grossed the previous year, and I, planted 50 tomato plants. And I did that for 4 years until I got to about 2,000 tomato plants and was delivering about 1,000 pounds of tomatoes every week back into Bend, Oregon. And I was selling through two avenues. This is kind of where the whole idea for Harvestly got started. But I would come into town, I'd have a truck. I drove like a old flatbed diesel truck, and it'd be, stacked with tomatoes. And I'd come into town, and the goal is to sell them as fast as you can. So how do you get to market as fast as you can? And so I'd go to a friend of mine who had like a produce market, and I'd go there and I'd ask him how much he wanted, and he would always say he wants a lot. And then I'd negotiate on price, and I was always disappointed with what price he gave me. So in the beginning, I was always taking that price. It was like, he'd offer me $1 a pound versus like retail would be $4 a pound. So he's making quadruple margin on that. And the tomatoes were so popular, I would wait there and I'd watch him go through and sell them. And there would be a line, and they would be literally waiting, and it was called Wally's Tomatoes, and they would sell out within 20 to 30 minutes, and it would be like 500 pounds. Ridiculous. It didn't make any sense. And then kind of more and more as I figured that out, I realized that, why can't I sell to them? Why can't I sell to these people myself? And then I got exposed to the whole direct to consumer channel, which is, I'm a farm and I want to sell direct to consumer. But then you're like, oh man, I need to figure out how to make a website. I need to figure out how to have a location and all these different costs that add up. And at the end of the day, yeah, you sell your tomatoes for $4 a pound, but you end up the expenses and the time, it doesn't paper out, and it doesn't make sense. And at the end of the day, what I was good at was farming. I wasn't good at necessarily building websites or owning a retail location. And so with all that in mind, I came to Cal Poly and started learning about different agriculture, and it dawned on me that there was a huge gap there, and it didn't just exist for me. It was most local farmers. Any kind of small farm had the same exact issue. And so I thought there had to be a middle ground. There's a way that a company, a bigger brand, can unite these brands and help them all sell direct to consumer and not have them invest in the website and the marketing and all those different costs. And so that became Harvestly. And it really was, how can we return the most amount of dollars to these local food producers, or at the time it was farmers, and at the same time, how can we deliver a good experience to the customer? So those were the two problems that we were solving. And turns out it's not just a problem to farmers, it's a problem to almost every single local food producer. So every week we had a different producer signing up, a different vertical. So it was started with farms, then it was bakeries, and then it was like seafood. And I was just like sitting there in awe that this problem is not just isolated to farms, it's almost every single local food producer. And then when you flip it on the other side, those businesses having a distribution problem ends up really affecting the consumer, because if they can't distribute efficiently, the consumer can't consume efficiently, if you know what I'm saying. So when we look to optimize that supply chain piece and connect these people, all of a sudden consumers had access to aggregation points that they had never had access to before, and it all became a much more fluid, efficient system, just because we added that connecting piece and made the supply side more efficient. And the consumers just ultimately benefited.
In 2021, what strategies has Harvestly implemented that focus on the food supply and building stronger communities?
So I think our entire business model is built around supporting and empowering communities, and particularly on the food side. So the core piece is we return 75% of the product price right back to the vendor, or our partners. So they're getting the majority of the dollars there, and they're being supported. And it's not, it's a direct deposit. They can do whatever they want with it. And the goal there is to help them grow their business. And it's become a true community-based business, because we only let consumers buy from food producers that are in their county. So we brought a definition to local, and that's been a very I think controversial topic for me, but a topic that's been nationwide, very, very misunderstood. Like, what does local mean, right? Whole Foods says it's this, whatever, another company says it's this, and how can we bring a definition to that? And there's not been a standard set. And so we're really trying to bring that standard, and that is hyper local. That is county based. That is your neighbor, you're buying your neighbor's products, right? And so just with that, it's created this community where everyone's trying to support each other, and there's just this flow of money that I don't think existed before.
2021 was definitely a challenging year for all of us. Can you share with us a little bit about your learnings from COVID and its effect on the infamous supply chain and food supply?
Yeah, I like to say that COVID put a magnifying glass under an already broken system. So when COVID first hit, national news was a lot about the ag supply chain breaking, and it's never been like this before, blah, blah, blah. And you couldn't really go to the grocery store and get what you wanted oftentimes because that supply chain had kind of broken. But this problem that I had been thinking about and solving, that's what it was, right? It was, to get the consumers to have access to all the food that they need, you need to go local, because in any case, if something went wrong on a global scale, that food is not going to come to you. So we're really relying on a lot of factors that we cannot control. Like, for example, right now in Los Angeles, there's like 40 or 50 boats that are just parked out there, and we can't get the products off of those boats into the stores across the US. And so that in itself is really proof that the globalization supply chain doesn't necessarily always work. And when COVID first hit, we had launched our first prototype, and even in the first month, there was products on Harvestly, like basic products that you couldn't get at the grocery store, just because we sourced it from a mile away instead of trying to source it from 300 miles away. And so that was really interesting. And it just kind of developed from there, and COVID really gave us the boost we needed to prove that this kind of service and thinking was needed, and it created a lot of new habits, right? Mm-hmm. And on the vendor side, they were willing to change because they started to see like, hey, maybe it doesn't make sense for me to go stand at the farmer's market for 7 hours. But then it just, they were so much more willing to adopt a new idea than previously.
What are some key things that you are doing to improve food security?
Yeah, so on the food security point, we've been kind of playing around in it and trying our best to kind of meld a somewhat broken system, like donating food and doing our best to kind of get really healthy products to the people who aren't as fortunate to have access to that food. And it started with a program, we'd never actually named it, I don't think, but it started because I think I donated like $200 of my own money and went to the farmers markets and just bought a bunch of food, put it in bags, and drove around the county and dropped those. Like I took like pre-orders from people who identified as in need, and this was during COVID. And it became so popular. It was like it went like viral in SLO County, and it was on the news and all that stuff. And it started with just me driving around, and then we had a few other people come in, and I think a nonprofit actually took it over, and now they're running it. But the whole idea was, going to the food bank is great, and we love to support the food bank, right? But at the end of the day, there's some pieces missing about good food, right? It's like you go there and the food is old, and it's not necessarily as nutritious as it needs to be. And for someone to really overcome a food scarcity and kind of bad habits of going to bad food, they need to have access to really good food. Like when I was doing that program, I had some people call me like crying and be like, I have never tasted celery that's this good. Like I've always hated celery, but now it's good. And so that piece longer term is what we're aiming at. And when we launch our new software coming up in January, we'll actually be able to take EBT and SNAP. And so we're going to be, hopefully the first true online, healthy food marketplace to be able to accept EBT and SNAP.
That's wonderful. I know when you started, you were focusing on, you had, of course, the fresh vegetables, but your Harvestly app also now includes bakery, ice cream, wine, even some homemade crafts. Tell us a little bit about this growth.
Yeah, so I kind of touched on this earlier, but from the beginning, I was trying to solve a problem for farmers. And it just happened to be that this problem existed with a lot of different local food businesses. And I can't say, I can't take credit for that in this opportunity that we've gotten, because I didn't think it was going to happen. But I think the team that we live with, kind of that diversity of thought and realizing that this is not just isolated to farmers was really interesting, and truly becoming kind of an online grocery store that's all localized. That's kind of what it is now. And the philosophy going forward is to stick around food. We've had a lot of opportunities to become more like Etsy, like a localized Etsy, and we've always kind of pushed back a little bit on that. I think that the food piece is what makes us unique. And, in startups, I don't know if there's people who are, I'm sure there's people who are really passionate about entrepreneurship. The idea of focusing on what you do best is what we want to carry forward. And I think we're just going to focus on food and try to improve that piece for now.
This year made it very easy for you to support local businesses while giving consumer access to some of the freshest food there in the Central Coast. You now have close to 150 vendors. Can you tell us or share with us a little bit more about how one becomes a vendor with Harvestly? Yeah,
so the idea is to break down as many barriers as we can to, start one piece, starting a local food business, and then two, running a local food business. And kind of all of our product roadmap on the software side is centered around that. Let's make it easy to run your own food business, and a lot more people will do it. And if you have a lot of people doing it, it creates this movement, and we've already seen it here. I mean, there are people starting businesses on Harvestly because it's all of a sudden become much easier. You don't have to invest, exactly kind of what the problem I was talking about earlier. You don't have to invest in a retail location. You do, get all the certifications that you would need to sell in person. You don't need the amount of capital that's needed to sell on Harvestly. It costs, like our platform is free, no fees. We take the 25%, but to sign up, it's really free. So to start a business here in SLO County on Harvestly, it costs about $300 to get the permitting you need, and then insurance. And so that piece alone is like, oh my gosh, like what, you could start a prepared food business in your house and sell on Harvestly. And we've seen that start to happen. And it's been this really, empowering, and it makes us feel really good about what we're doing because we're supporting people's passions. And, we've had people come in and say, hey, I wanted, they might be a customer and they're saying, I've always wanted to, cook prepared meals, but I've never known how to start my own business. And then we're just like, here's a 5-step plan, do this, sign up on Harvestly, and then you're selling.
The ag tech space is constantly moving and growing. How does Harvestly work closely with technology to create more quality in the food supply and more efficiency?
Yeah, so at the core, Harvestly is a software company. We are building software products to help local food producers get their product to the end consumer. And this kind of vertically integrates throughout over time. So it's, right now it's just on this sales channel. But in general, we're focused on efficiency, but trying to maintain that cultural aspect of food that, not every product is the same. There's uniqueness, there's something that, special about the food that you produce. So we're not going to try to fit all these people into one square. It's almost like working with technology without trying to control people. I think a lot of technology these days is aimed at control. That's the last thing we're trying to do. It's really this decentralized aspect where you're in control of your own destiny. You can do what you want with it, but we're not going to tell you exactly what to do.
How do your community members find out about the new options available with Harvestly's new selection?
Yeah, so on one front, we have the vendors. So vendors are always doing announcements about what they're selling on Harvestly, and through that's generally through social media or at farmers markets. They have little flyers like, buy this on Harvestly. And then we have our own like general kind of a generalized marketing team here who focuses on, outreach and finding new customers. And then, weekly you're getting a couple of emails from us talking about what products are on Harvestly, what are new products. And, I would say that the customers love new products. Our best sales periods or growth periods are typically when we have a lot of new vendors. It's that discovery piece, telling a story, and really feeling connected to someone who you haven't connected with before. And that is really magnified by it being food.
What are some challenges you've had to overcome to continue advancements in your digital marketplace?
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest challenge of all time has been the like age-old chicken and egg thing, right? It's like if you have vendors but no consumers, the vendors are going to leave. If you have consumers but no vendors, the consumers are going to leave. So that, over time is always going to be the biggest challenge. But then just beyond that, running a business, right? It's like, you have stakeholders, you have investors, you have consumers, you have vendors. You're trying to make everybody happy while fulfilling this mission. It's a very, difficult challenge, but I will say like everyone that's joined this team and everyone that's been around us, our advisors, our investors, have been so supportive that it's not made it too challenging. If you get to too challenging, that's when the business dies, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm eternally grateful for everyone that's surrounded themselves around this company to make it happen.
Well, I guess my final question would be, if we are sitting here 3 years from now, which I hope you're here with us, what are some key outcomes you'd like to see Harvestly have to have lasting impact, both on the future of health, sustainability, and the local economies?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that I'm looking at is truly having an impact on changing the food supply chain. So I want to see habits change. I want to see consumers start buying local every week and truly changing. And unfortunately, it's the idea of creative destruction. Yeah, creative destruction. When you have a new product come in that it makes it better and more efficient, and then the kind of old ways start to, go out. And like that for me is these big food corporations who are running majority of the food system. I kind of want to see them go, to be honest. Like I understand what they're doing and I understand where there needs to be profit. But for me, I want to lift these local food producers up. I want to make sure that they're, surviving and thriving, to be honest. And so to that, it's like, I could go to any vendor on Harvestly and they would be so excited and doing well in 3 years. Like pick a random one and make sure they're, living a good life and they're feeling really fulfilled.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I guess we can now open it for Q&A. Is there any Q&As? As I'm looking. John, okay. Oh,
Hey, Walter. I appreciate your mission. I applaud you. I think it's an important problem that we in West Virginia are also struggling with. We have in West Virginia, as you know, there's many cases of underserved populations, and all of them are also affected by this problem of having low access or poor access to good nutritious food. So I was intrigued by your business model, and one of the things that struck me, I went and I looked at your online listings, and this is an issue that came up as well when we were sort of in that space here in West Virginia. The conundrum where, you know, a pint of tomatoes or a pound of tomatoes is $4 a pound in the farmer's market. But if you go into a Walmart, if I can drive 20 miles down the road, go to Walmart, I can get that for $1.20. So, you know, there's always this conundrum with good access to food, but then oftentimes that food is not cheap. And especially in food deserts, which are often where you have underserved populations. That's why, you know, grocery stores don't locate over there, because it's not profitable, right? So how do you, I mean, we've come up with a bunch of strategies, some are moonshots, but how have you thought about that problem? I mean, I appreciate the charity, and, you know, food banks do a great job, but as you pointed out, their food is not it's calorie rich, but maybe not nutrient rich. You know, how do you bridge that gap? So charity is not sustainable, but, you know, and we need to have local economic effort that also contributes to that low cost sustainable food production.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and thank you for asking it, because it is a huge problem, and it's something that I think about often, and was one of the original kind of ideas with this. And so long term, there's really like three focuses that we're trying to tackle this with. The first is the idea that in the typical food supply chain, so for example, with Walmart, there's a lot more players, right? So there's everybody has to make a margin at the end of the day. So there's this kind of markup continually. Maybe it's 1%, but there are all these different pieces and all these different companies that have to make money. So that's kind of the model that we're trying to get rid of. So if we say, let's get rid of all those different pieces, can we make this food less expensive? So the $4 per pound tomato. So if there isn't a bunch of different players trying to make a margin, can we cut out the middleman and make that product cheaper? And I think the short-term answer to that is no, because these farmers are living off this money that the product costs. But longer term, I think the answer is yes, because you're basically creating a more efficient supply chain. And with volume, if you have a more efficient supply chain that doesn't have all those different businesses trying to make a margin, yes, you can actually make it cheaper, because at the end of the day, there's a lot less businesses involved. If it's from that farmer to the consumer, and if it's in almost a wholesale relationship, that product can be cheaper, but it takes a long time and it takes a lot of volume. For example, we have seen over time, since we started harvesting, prices coming down. There's two factors that contribute to that. One is volume, because they just come here to this fulfillment center and drop off whatever orders they got. So it's almost wholesale, but they're getting 75%. And then the second piece is competition. So at a farmer's market, there is not much competition, even though it looks like it, because every booth is so independent. You're not going to go from booth to booth comparing prices. No, I've never seen anybody do that. But on Harvestly, when you go onto a category, the prices are so obvious. It's like eggs are a great example. We've seen egg prices on Harvestly go down significantly since we started, because we have 4 different egg vendors and they're all competing. It's this really natural decentralized competitions that have driven prices down. But again, I don't know that it can exist in a farmer's market traditional sense. It has to be online because the consumer is paying way more attention to it than at the farmer's market. And then I think the second piece to that, the second strategy for us is to diversify their revenue streams. So if a farm is totally reliant on that $4 tomato, it's going to have to be $4 per pound. But what's come up in a lot of recent agriculture conversations is agrotourism. So let's say there's this really amazing farm, but all they've been doing is selling $4 per pound tomatoes, but their farm is amazing. Like, it's so cool. Well, let's do U-Picks. Let's have people come there and visit it. Let's make you more revenue streams so you don't have to solely rely on those products. And it's about building a brand, right? These farmers are not necessarily good at branding or marketing or finance in general. So it's kind of our job to figure out other revenue streams. And then the third piece is EBT and SNAP, just making it more accessible to shop good food, and having EBT and SNAP payments in place, I think, will help a lot with that.
Any other questions coming in? Or you
Looks
can
like-
feel free to chat as well.
Looks like Sarah has her hand raised.
Yes, Sarah. Let's see, did it go?
Hold on, it took me a minute to get off of mute. I'm so sorry. Walter, Tanya, what a wonderful job. And Walter, I mean, just tremendous vision. It's hard to believe you started it as Harvestly as a high schooler. And so I'm first inspired by that, but I'm secondly inspired by your efforts to actually help others become small business owners themselves. And I think that's a really critical area there. I wonder if you could just explore a little bit more with us. Are your vendors, your new vendors, your food producers, maybe your bread bakers, are they using Harvestly as sort of their financial middle and back office? Like, could you just break down a little bit more how you help others start companies in the food production space?
Yeah, so up until now, it's been kind of just like the idea of not starting with things that don't scale, right? So we're literally like having conversations with people and helping them start businesses. The longer term vision is here to have, that technology platform help you start a business so it's more scalable, right? So you could start a business easily anywhere. But I think the people who are coming in and starting businesses, initially it's a passion. So they're just kind of like, I want to make some food. And then they realize like, hey, like if you start getting this out to customers and the customers really love it, then you're like, oh my gosh, like this might be a good idea. And so with the idea of Harvestly, you get like, oftentimes you get instant feedback. It's like reviews. So if you get 5 stars, 10 5 stars on a product, like you're like, okay, let's invest in this. And I think longer term, our goal is to help, give them those resources. So investing in these businesses and helping them grow and scale, because at the same time, they have access to that feedback. We do too, and we can see all the data on consumption. So we really know like what businesses are doing really well and what businesses aren't. And yeah, I mean, I think long term, we're trying to provide as many resources as we can to help those businesses grow.
Thank you.
Any other questions coming in?
Yeah, I've got one, and it kind of goes, Matthew just dropped one into the chat that is very similar to what I'm asking, which he has thinking about seeing pressure to perform due diligence. And I was thinking, how are you handling like gap certifications, traceability, things like that with all, and I don't know how many vendors you have, but with all those vendors in foods, particularly in fresh vegetables and stuff, I was wondering what you're putting in place to keep traceability on all that stuff if it's coming from multiple vendors and then going out in a dispersed manner.
Yeah, so that gets into some pretty complicated supply chain stuff, like day to day, that I don't necessarily work in, but I know that like the operations team is like really good at that traceability aspect, and they're it's a pretty sophisticated but simple system, if you know what I'm saying. It's like all the products come in and it's simple, we put them in the bags, but the whole time, everybody knows where those came from and where they're supposed to go, I guess, through spreadsheets and all that good stuff. But then on the kind of due diligence piece, we really rely on and work with the health department. And so the health department has like their licenses. So like say it's a cottage A or like an egg handler's license. So that is our kind of bare minimum that you have to have. So if you sign up, we're going to do our due diligence and make sure you have the correct permits. And then on top of that, it's like insurance and kind of operational history, like what, how long have you been around, and like what can we do to help you? And we see all the products come through here, right? So and if we see something that's not right, we're pretty quick to pull it out and notify that vendor and say, hey, we need to change. But we're not a business to say, you're shut down. Like I think we've disabled like 2 or 3 vendors in the last year and a half, because it's like we want to work with them and make them understand what they have to do, rather than just saying, hey, no, you can't do it. Because a lot of these people, they're not, you said like Amazon resellers, but these are not like Amazon resellers. It's a totally different business. It's mom and pop businesses who are really like, they're wanting to like have a good product. And so that motivation piece has really helped us, because we can give them feedback and they oftentimes fix it pretty quickly. But again, if we see like a product that's not up to standard that comes through the fulfillment, we pick it out really quickly. And so does that answer the question?
Yeah, the quality and standards is part of it. But I was thinking like, right now there's a large salmonella outbreak, and if that, God forbid, was one of your clients and that came in and then was distributed out, again, going back to like the GAP certifications, are you requiring GAP certifications from your people, or?
No, so we really don't try to take that piece on. We're trying to take the software piece on. And so that's somewhat up to the vendor. And I will say, like, our whole business model is designed around never owning the products. So we don't take inventory of anything. We're truly just like a distribution and software company. And so to that piece, we're not like trying to invest in that. Again, that might change if we see a big issue, but we haven't seen that come up yet. But if it does, I mean, we're willing to like look into it and try to solve it. It just hasn't really come up as a big problem here, at least.
Okay, any last final questions?
I had a follow-up if there was time, Tanya.
We have time, John.
All right. So Walter, you had mentioned about the scale, economies of scale, which is clearly the holy grail for anything local, right? I mean, and especially in a state like West Virginia, which has a lot of dispersed populations in a widely dispersed geography. That's an especial challenge. Clearly with marketplaces like yours, you're going to drive competition. Prices will only go down, margins will only go down as far as the production cost will be, depending upon the production cost. And as you pointed out, many of these farmers are small scale, so their production costs are pretty high. So how can we help these farmers, and how can we help collective, communities of farmers to drive those production costs down so that we can compete with, the large lettuce farmers in the Arizona Desert Bowl, for example, right? I mean, that produce lettuce all the year round. I mean, indoor production has got, Holland is the largest indoor producer of produce in the world. They have a model. So how can we help farmers in the United States, local communities in the United States, drive that production function down in order to meet mass market grocery prices?
Yeah, so I don't even think it comes from like the production side, the vendor side. Like, they're not doing anything wrong, because they are, they're trying to just make money. But I think that production function gets less expensive with scale, right? Like you were saying. And the biggest marketing aspect of Harvestly and the success that we have found is that we are one brand uniting 160 different brands. So again, like, it's really hard for a farmer to know how to market and how to get their product to the consumer. And so if we can provide those resources and they can focus more on the farming, we believe that those production costs will go down over time. And then kind of on the aspect of volume, it's really just about adoption, like on the consumer side, because, you know, here in this county, there's 250,000 people, I think. That's plenty of people to support 160 vendors. It's just how, you know, how can we make the consumer experience good enough to get all of those people ordering? It's a challenge, and I think we've seen that, you know, obviously our orders have grown significantly kind of week to week, but that piece of just driving adoption and the more, you know, the more volume you can get these vendors, the lower the prices will be. And then I think more on like a policy level, you know, the USDA has really started to gear focus towards smaller and local regional production. For example, like the LFPP grant, the Local Food Promotion Project, they got, I think they got $76 million this year to kind of support companies like Harvestly, where we're, you know, adding this connecting piece. And so on a policy level, the USDA is and you know, I think has to continue to gear their, you know, resources towards these small farmers to help them. I don't necessarily believe that that's a long-term solution, but for the short term, it totally is. And you know, just in general, like a big commercial farm has so many more advantages for getting capital right now over a small farm. And so particularly with the USDA, you know, it's crop insurance, it's all these different subsidies that's helping them get their prices down. But if we can kind of flip that, you're going to see a complete change. And I think that's going on. I mean, I can't talk to anyone at the USDA, unfortunately, you know, about this, but, you know, I think it's happening just based off the grants that have been coming out.
Okay, Molly, I couldn't recall. Did you have a question, Molly? I just wasn't sure. No. Okay, any final questions? Making sure I didn't see any hands. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And Walter, thank you for your vision and sharing your time with us today. We really appreciate it. We hope that you all join us for future Real Talk series. And if you'd like to learn more about Vantage Ventures, our website is vantageventures.io. Tanya Smigaki, have a wonderful day, and thank you again for joining.